When I was 14, my dad literally threw me out of the house with nothing but a trash bag and my clothes and told me to never come back. Now 9 years later, I finally made him face what he did. This is going to be long, so bear with me. Some background: my mom died when I was 8, cancer. It was just me and my dad after that, and we were actually okay for a while. He wasn't like super affectionate or anything, but he made sure I had what I needed. We had this small 3-bedroom house in a decent neighborhood. Nothing fancy, but it was home. Things changed when I was around 13 when my dad started dating Diane. At first she seemed nice enough, always bringing these little gifts for me, asking about school, that kind of stuff. Looking back, it was all fake as hell. Once they got serious, she started making these comments about how messy I was, how much I ate, how expensive my school stuff was. Dad never defended me, head just kind of nod along. They got married 6 months after meeting. No big ceremony or anything, just went to the courthouse. I wasn't even invited, just came home from school one day and Dad told me they'd gotten married that morning. That night Diane moved in permanently and everything went downhill fast. Within weeks I noticed my mom's pictures disappearing from the walls. My dad claimed they were just redecorating, but I'd find them in drawers or stuffed in boxes in the garage. Then Diane got pregnant and that's when everything really went to __. She started treating our house like it was solely hers. My bedroom, she needed it for the nursery. My stuff moved to the tiny guest room that used to be a home office. My mom's things that I'd kept slowly vanishing. When I'd ask about anything, Diane would give this fake concerned look and tell my dad I was acting out and being difficult about the baby. The night it all exploded was in October. It was pouring rain, thunderstorms, and everything. I came home from school to find most of my stuff in black garbage bags in the hallway. Diane was in the kitchen talking to my dad about how they needed to make some changes for their real family. I asked what was going on and Diane just smiled this cold smile and said it was time for me to go. Just like that. My dad wouldn't even look at me at first. When he finally did, his face was completely blank, like I was a stranger. I started asking questions, getting louder, demanding to know what was happening. Dad finally snapped and started yelling about how I was ungrateful, how I'd never accepted Diane, how I was making her pregnancy difficult. Then he grabbed one of the trash bags and shoved it at me. That's when he said I needed to get out of his house, that I was old enough to take care of myself. He shoved a crumpled 20 bill in my hand and said that was all I'd ever get from him for the rest of my life. I was in shock, asking where I was supposed to go. That's when Diane stepped in, literally smirking, saying she was sick of pretending to care about his bastard and now they could have a real family without your mother's leftovers. The bastard comment hit me like a truck. My dad didn't even correct her. Instead, he went to the wall where there was still one school photo of me, ripped it down and tore it in half, saying I was never really part of the family anyway. I tried to argue to understand what was happening, but my dad just grabbed my arm and started pushing me toward the door. I was trying not to cry, asking if I could at least call someone, get my school backpack, anything. He told me I could grab one bag and that was it, and if I tried to contact them again they'd get a restraining order. As he shoved me out the front door into the pouring rain, he said if he saw me near the house again he'd call the cops and report me for trespassing. The last thing I heard before the door slammed was him telling his stepkids, Diane's kids from her previous marriage, that I was just some homeless kid begging for money and that's why they needed to keep their doors locked. I stood there in the rain, soaking wet, with one garbage bag of clothes through the window. I could see Diane opening it to throw out a handful of my school pictures, yelling to take my crap with me. I had nowhere to go. My phone was almost dead and I had no charger. All I could think to do was try to get to my Aunt Leah's place, my mom's sister. She lived about 4 miles away in a small apartment. I started walking in the rain, dragging that garbage bag, crying the whole way. When I got to Aunt Leah's I was completely drenched. She opened the door and just stared at me for a second before pulling me inside. I broke down trying to explain what happened. She called my dad immediately, but he wouldn't answer. She tried texting, calling again, nothing. When she finally got through, all my dad said was that I wasn't welcome back and if she had a problem with it she could take me in herself. Then he hung up. Aunt Leah was furious but also worried sick. Her apartment was tiny, just 1 bedroom, but she made up the couch for me and said I could stay as long as I needed. The next morning we found out my dad had blocked both our numbers and all social media. Aunt Leah tried going to the house but no one would answer the door, even though both cars were there. 2 days later when we went back to try to get more of my stuff while my dad was at work, the locks had been changed. My aunt called the police but they said it was a family matter and they couldn't help unless there was a custody agreement. Since there wasn't one they couldn't do anything. Aunt Leah spent the next week making calls to family services, to a lawyer friend, to my school. She managed to get temporary guardianship of me, but the process for anything more permanent would take time. My dad didn't even show up for the first hearing. A month into staying with Aunt Leah I realized I'd probably never get most of my stuff back. All my mom's things that I'd kept, her jewelry box, the quilt she made me, the letter she wrote before she died, were gone, probably thrown out or hidden away. One night, going through the few photos I had managed to save in my school binder, I found an old picture of my mom holding me as a baby. On the back in her handwriting it said Mason and me Trust Fund established. I had no idea what it meant, but when I showed Aunt Leah her face went white. She sat me down and explained that my mom had life insurance and had set up a trust for me when I was born, money that was supposed to go to my education or be given to me when I turned 18, money that my dad was supposed to be managing for me. Money that, from the looks of their newly renovated house and new SUV, he and Diane had been spending. That night, lying on Aunt Leah's couch, I made a promise to myself: one day I'd make him pay for every single word, for throwing me away like garbage, for stealing what my mom left for me. I didn't know how yet, but I knew I'd never let this go, and 9 years later I finally kept that promise. I'll post part 2 tomorrow if people are interested in how this all played out. Update 1: holy ___. I wasn't expecting This much response, thanks for all the comments and support. A lot of you wanted to know what happened next and how I got my revenge, so hey race part 2. Living with Aunt Leah wasn't easy at first. Her apartment was tiny AF and I was sleeping on a pull-out couch in the living room. She worked 2 jobs just to keep us afloat and I felt like a burden most days, but she never not once made me feel unwelcome. The first few months were rough. I kept having these dreams where I was back home and my dad was acting normal like nothing had happened. Then I'd wake up on that lumpy couch and remember everything all over again. I missed my stuff, my room, my routine, but mostly I missed who I thought my dad was before Diane came along. Aunt Leah helped me get into a new school, but I didn't really make friends. I was that weird kid who showed up mid-year with no backstory. My grades tanked. I stopped caring about homework or tests or anything really. Aunt Leah tried getting me to talk to the school counselor, but I just sat there saying nothing for the whole session. What was I supposed to say? My dad threw me out like garbage and might not even be my real dad. About 6 months after moving in with Aunt Leah, I met her boyfriend Rick. He worked construction and seemed okay, kind of quiet but decent to Leah. One day that summer he asked if I wanted to make some cash helping out on smaller jobs. I was 15 by then and needed money for like everything, so I said yeah. Working construction sucked at first. It was hot. I was sore every night and the older guys gave me all the crappy jobs, but something about the physical work helped. I'd come home too tired to think about all this, __. With my dad. Plus I started making my own money, which meant I wasn't completely dependent on Aunt Leah anymore. One Saturday when I was 16, Rick and I were grabbing lunch at this diner near where we were working. It was like 2 blocks from my old neighborhood, but I never went near there if I could help it as we were paying. This older lady came up to our table. She was like, "Mason, is that you?" I didn't recognize her at first, then realized it was Mrs. Garner, our neighbor from across the street. She seemed surprised to see me, asked how I was doing. I mumbled something about living with my aunt now. Then she said something that made my stomach drop. "The house looks so different now. Your dad must have spent a fortune on those renovations. New kitchen, new bathrooms, even that fancy sunroom addition they built last year, and that pool they put in last summer. Your mom would barely recognize the place." Rick gave me a look, but I just nodded along until Mrs. Garner left. On the drive back he asked what that was all about. I told him everything about the trust fund note on the photo, about Diane's comments suggesting I wasn't really my dad's kid, all of it. Rick didn't say much, just that I should talk to Aunt Leah. When we got home that night the 3 of us sat at their tiny kitchen table. Aunt Leah admitted she'd been trying to find out about my mom's will and any money that might have been left for me, but hadn't gotten far. My dad had blocked her everywhere and she didn't have money for a real lawyer. Rick surprised me by saying his cousin worked as a paralegal at a law firm and might be able to help us get copies of public records without it costing much. I remember thinking it was the first time an adult had actually offered to do something instead of just saying how sorry they were about my situation. 2 weeks later Rick's cousin came through. She couldn't get us my mom's actual will without legal proceedings, but she found records of my mom's life insurance policy, a $300,000 policy with me listed as the beneficiary with my dad as the trustee until I turned 18. There was also a property deed showing my mom had inherited a small piece of land from her parents that was supposed to go to me. Aunt Leah was livid. She tried calling my dad again but was still blocked. She even drove to his house but no one answered the door even though both cars were in the driveway. We knew they were just hiding inside. Around this time Aunt Leah managed to get permanent guardianship of me. My dad didn't even show up to contest it. The judge granted it pretty much automatically since had abandoned me and made no effort to check on me for over a year. When I turned 17 something weird happened. I was at the mall with some guys from work when I literally ran into this older woman coming out of a store. I apologized and was about to walk away when she grabbed my arm and just stared at me. She started crying right there in the middle of the mall. Turns out it was my mom's old college roommate Beth. Beth insisted on buying me a soda and talking. She kept saying how much I looked like my mom, how she'd tried to find me after the funeral but my dad had cut off all contact with my mom's friends. Then she asked about my real father and if I deconnected with him yet. I had no idea what she was talking about. Beth looked confused then horrified as she realized I didn't no. She tried to backtrack but I wouldn't let it go. Finally she told me that my dad, the man who raised me, wasn't my biological father. My mom had been briefly involved with someone else before getting back together with my dad. When she found out she was pregnant, my dad knew I wasn't biologically his but chose to stay and raise me as his own. I didn't believe her at first. Why would my dad adopt me, raise me for 14 years, then suddenly throw me out claiming I wasn't his? But Beth was certain. She even showed me old photos on her phone of my mom from college, including one with a guy she said was my biological father. I left that mall feeling like my whole life was a lie. When I told Aunt Leah, she didn't seem surprised. She admitted she'd suspected something like this but hadn't known for sure. She explained that my mom and dad had broken up briefly in college but got back together right before my mom found out she was pregnant. My dad had always treated me as his son, had even legally adopted me after I was born. What didn't make sense was why he'd suddenly decided I wasn't his son after 14 years, unless Diane had somehow convinced him to reject me, or maybe had always resented me deep down and Diane just gave him permission to act on it. A few months later Aunt Leah got a Facebook message from someone claiming to be my maternal grandmother, my mom's mom. I'd never met my mom's parents. My dad always said they weren't in the picture, but according to this message they had been trying to be part of my life since my mom died, but my dad had blocked them, told them I wanted nothing to do with them, even threatened restraining orders. Aunt Leah was skeptical at first. She'd lost touch with her parents years ago due to some family drama, but after video chatting with them she confirmed they were legit. We arranged to meet them at a restaurant halfway between our cities. Meeting my grandparents was surreal. They had photos of my mom. I'd never seen stories about her. I'd never heard they'd been sending birthday cards and Christmas presents for years after she died, but I'd never received any of them. My dad had been cashing the checks they sent for me and keeping the gifts they'd tried to visit multiple times but were always turned away, but the biggest shock came when my grandfather mentioned the education trust fund, not just the life insurance money but a separate trust my grandparents had set up for me when I was born, money specifically for college plus some investments that had grown over the years, money my dad shouldn't have been able to access at all. It was in a separate account that required trustee approval for withdrawals. My grandfather was a retired accountant and had kept meticulous records of everything. He showed me statements indicating unauthorized withdrawals had started about a year after my mom died, small amounts at first then larger sums around the time my dad met Diane. By the time I was thrown out, over 200,000 had been taken. I remember sitting in that restaurant looking at those papers and feeling this cold rage building inside me. It wasn't just that my dad had thrown me out, had been stealing from me for years. Money my mom had left to secure my future, money my grandparents had saved for my education, all gone, spent on renovations, cars, and whatever else Diane wanted. My grandparents wanted to take legal action immediately, but I asked them to wait. I was still 17, still a minor. Any legal battle would be complicated while I was underage, plus I wanted to handle this my way. I spent the next year gathering evidence. My grandparents helped access bank records showing the withdrawals. Aunt Leah's neighbor worked at the DMV and confirmed my dad had purchased a new SUV right after a large withdrawal from my account. I even found old emails from my mom to my dad saved on a thumb drive Aunt Leah had kept, where she specifically discussed the trust fund and how important it was to her that the money be used for my future. When I turned 18, I finally had a real choice about what to do next. My grandparents offered to help me pay for college. They started a new fund for me when they found out what happened to the first one. Aunt Leah and Rick said I could continue living with them as long as I needed, but all I could think about was making my dad pay for what he did, not just throwing me out but stealing what my mom left for me, lying about my grandparents, hiding my true parentage, all of it. I decided then that I wasn't just going to move on with my life, I was going to get back every penny he took from me, and I was going to make him face what he did. The revenge plan started taking shape the day I turned 18, and it was going to be a long game. Part 3 coming tomorrow. Update 2: things got hectic at work plus some family stuff came up. Anyway, hey, race the next part of how I finally got revenge on my POS dad. So, after turning 18, I didn't immediately go nuclear on my dad. I wish I could have, but I knew I needed to be smart about this. Going after someone with no plan is just setting yourself up to fail, and I wasn't about to mess this up after waiting so long. The first couple years after high school I kept working construction with Rick. I was good at it, learned fast, and started making decent money. By 20 I had saved enough to move out of Aunt Leah's place into a small apartment with a buddy from work. It wasn't much, but it was mine. During this time I was also working with my grandparents to figure out exactly how much money my dad had stolen. We hired this accountant who specialized in fraud cases, not cheap, but my grandparents covered it. The accountant went through everything: bank statements, property records, tax filings. Turns out my dad had taken over 300,000 from my accounts over the years. 300,000, that's not just stealing lunch money, that's straight up theft on a massive scale. But hey, race, where it gets even more, up. While going through old documents we found papers showing my dad had actually legally adopted me after I was born. He knew I wasn't biologically his kid, but he chose to be my father, signed all the paperwork, made it official. Then he threw me away like trash when his new wife decided she didn't want me around. When I was 21, something unexpected happened. I got a Facebook message from my dad's sister, my Aunt Carol. We'd never been close, she lived in another state and only visited a couple times when I was growing up. Her message was weird, asking if we could meet next time she was in town. I was suspicious AF but agreed to coffee in a public place. When we met, Aunt Carol seemed nervous, kept looking around like she expected someone to be watching us. After some awkward small talk she handed me a manila envelope. Inside were copies of emails between her and my dad from around the time I was thrown out. In them my dad admitted that Diane had given him an ultimatum: either I go or she would. She was pregnant and didn't want competition for attention or resources. The emails showed my dad actually considering his options, like getting rid of your kid is just some normal decision you make. But it got worse. There were also copies of bank statements showing large transfers from my trust account to my dad's personal account, and a copy of what looked like my signature on withdrawal forms, except I never signed anything. My dad had been forging my signature on documents for years. Aunt Carol was crying by this point, saying she'd only recently found out what my dad had done when she was helping their elderly mother, my grandmother, organize her finances. She'd found old emails and documents my dad had left on their mom's computer. She said she couldn't stay silent anymore, even though it meant betraying her brother. I asked why my dad would leave evidence on his mother's computer. Aunt Carol explained that my dad had been helping manage their mom's finances after she broke her hip a few years back, had used her computer when his laptop was being repaired, and apparently never deleted the files. Classic boomer move, not understanding how digital footprints work. After meeting with Aunt Carol I decided to dig deeper into my dad and Diane's current situation. Through some social media stalking they had me blocked, but they didn't block Aunt Leah's new account. I discovered they'd started some home renovation business a few years back. The business Instagram showed they were doing kitchen and bathroom remodels, exactly the kind of they'd done to our old house using my money. But reading the comments and reviews online it seemed like their business was struggling. Lots of complaints about unfinished work, poor quality, missed deadlines. Their most recent posts were desperate promos offering big discounts. Seemed like karma was already starting to catch up with them. Around this time I also got a weird Instagram DM from someone claiming to be my half-sister Diane's daughter with my dad. She was 15 now and wanted to know why I never visited or called. Apparently my dad and Diane had told the kids I abandoned them, that I ran away because I didn't want to be part of their family. I didn't respond, not her fault, but I wasn't Ready to deal with that mess with everything I was learning, I decided it was time to take action. I consulted with a lawyer paid for by my grandparents about our options. The lawyer laid it out pretty clearly. We had a solid case for financial fraud, identity theft, and breach of fiduciary duty. The statute of limitations hadn't run out yet. We could potentially recover not just the stolen money but additional damages as well. But I didn't just want to file a quiet lawsuit that my dad could potentially settle without real consequences. I wanted him to feel the same panic and fear I felt standing in the rain with a garbage bag of clothes. I wanted him to know exactly what was coming and be unable to stop it. So the lawyer and I came up with a plan. We'd prepare a comprehensive package containing copies of all the evidence of financial fraud, a formal notice of intent to file civil suit, copies of the police report we'd filed regarding the identity theft, a detailed accounting of every dollar taken from my account statements from my grandparents about being denied access to me, and a personal letter from me laying out exactly what would happen next. The lawyer warned me about making any threats in the letter, so I kept it factual but cold. I listed every betrayal, every lie, every moment my dad chose Diane over me. I ended it by saying I wasn't interested in any excuses or apologies, only full financial restitution, plus interest. I spent weeks perfecting this package, making sure every document was in order, every claim backed up with evidence. I wanted it to be overwhelming, the kind of thing that would make my dad realize he couldn't just brush this off or talk his way out of it. The final touch was deciding how to deliver it. I couldn't go myself. I knew seeing my dad face to face might make me lose my cool, and I didn't want to just mail it too impersonal, too easy to ignore. So I asked my buddy Tyler, who had been hearing about this saga for years, if he'd deliver it for me. He agreed immediately. We packed everything into a black document box. Formal and ominous looking, Tyler practiced what he'd say if my dad or Diane tried to engage with him. Just a simple, "I'm here to deliver this to James Mason from his son. He'll be expecting your call, then walk away." Yesterday morning, Tyler texted me a photo of himself standing on my old front porch, black box in hand with the caption, "Package delivered." An hour later, my phone started blowing up with notifications. My dad suddenly unblocking me after 9 years, bombarding me with texts, calls, and voicemails. I didn't answer any of them, just watched as the count kept climbing. 20 messages, 40, 60. By evening there were 73 unread messages and voicemails on my phone. I listened to just one voicemail, my dad's voice shaking, actually crying, begging me to call him back, saying we needed to talk, that there had been a misunderstanding, 9 years of silence, and now he wanted to talk, now that he was facing real consequences. Suddenly I existed again. I texted Tyler, "It's done, phase 1 complete. The real reckoning was about to begin. Part 4 coming tomorrow. The final confrontation, final update." Okay guys, this is it, the final part. Thanks for all your support and comments through this wild journey. A lot of you have been asking if I've responded to my dad yet, or what happened after I sent the package. Well, hey, race how it all went down. For 3 days after Tyler delivered the package, I didn't respond to a single message from my dad, not one. I just let him stew in his own panic. The messages started desperate and got increasingly frantic. By day 2 he was sending voice messages where he was literally sobbing. On day 3 Diane started messaging me too, first acting all sweet like we were old friends, then getting pissed when I didn't respond, then back to desperate begging. I showed all the messages to my lawyer. She said this was exactly what she expected. First denial, then anger, then bargaining. She advised me to keep ignoring them until they were ready to actually talk about repayment. On day 4 I got a message that actually made me pause, not from my dad or Diane but from my half-brother, the one who was just a toddler when I was kicked out. He's 17 now. His message was simple: "I just found out what they did to you. I'm sorry, can we talk?" I didn't respond to him either, not because I blamed him, he was just a kid, but because I didn't want him to be a go-between for my dad. If my dad wanted to fix this, he needed to face me directly. That same afternoon my dad sent a message that was different from the others: "No more begging or excuses, just tell me what you want to make this right now." We were getting somewhere. I had my lawyer draft a response. We agreed to meet at her office the following Monday, not for negotiations. We were past that point. This meeting was for me to lay out exactly what would happen next and for him to understand the full consequences of what had done. The weekend before the meeting was weird AF. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat much, kept imagining different scenarios of how it would go. Part of me wanted my dad to gravel, to break down completely. Another part just wanted this over with so I could move on with my life. Monday morning came. I got to my lawyer's office 30 minutes early, wearing my best clothes, nothing fancy, just clean dark jeans and a button-up shirt. I wanted to look like an adult, not the scared kid had thrown away 9 years ago. At exactly 1000 the receptionist called to say my dad had arrived. My lawyer asked if I wanted her to go out first, but I said no, I wanted to see his face when I walked through that door. When I stepped into the reception area, my dad was standing there looking like absolute _ head, aged way more than 9 years, hair almost completely gray, face gaunt, eyes bloodshot. For a second, just a split second, I felt a twinge of something like pity, then I remembered standing in the rain with a garbage bag and that feeling disappeared real quick. He tried to hug me. I stepped back and held out my hand, instead professional distant. The handshake was awkward, his palm was sweaty, his grip weak. I noticed his hand was shaking. We went into a conference room where my lawyer was waiting. My dad kept staring at me like he couldn't believe what he was seeing. I guess the skinny 14-year-old had changed a lot. ID filled out from years of construction work, grown a beard, gotten a few tattoos. I didn't look like the kid in those school photos had ripped up. My lawyer started going through the evidence methodically: bank statements, forged signatures, trust documents, the adoption papers showing had legally chosen to be my father, emails between him and Diane about getting rid of me. With each new document my dad seemed to shrink smaller in his chair. When she finished there was this heavy silence in the room. My dad cleared his throat and said he never meant for things to go this far, that Diane had pressured him, that he was weak and made a terrible mistake, that had spent years regretting what he did. I just looked at him and asked, where was this regret when I was sleeping on Aunt Leah's couch? Where was it when I was working construction at 16 to help pay rent? Where was it during every birthday, every Christmas, every graduation he missed? He had no answer for that. Then came the financial part. My lawyer laid out exactly how much had been taken, $347,000 plus interest over 9 years plus punitive damages we would seek in court plus legal fees, altogether close to $600,000. My dad went pale. He said there was no way he could pay that amount. Their business was struggling. They'd remortgaged the house. They had debts. That's when I spoke up. I told him I didn't care if he had to sell the house, the cars, the business, everything. I didn't care if he ended up bankrupt. He would pay back every cent he stole from me one way or another. My lawyer then explained we were giving him two options: either agree to a structured settlement with a payment plan and a lien on all his assets, or we would proceed with a lawsuit that would include criminal charges for fraud and identity theft. He asked for time to think about it. My lawyer said he had 48 hours. As we were wrapping up, my dad asked if we could talk privately for a few minutes. My lawyer looked at me and I nodded. She left the room saying she'd be right outside if I needed her. Once we were alone, my dad broke down, like completely lost it, sobbing, saying had ruined everything, that Diane had turned him against me, that she'd threatened to leave with the baby if he didn't choose her over me. He said after I was gone he realized what had done but was too ashamed to try to find me. I just sat there watching him cry, and years ago those tears might have meant something to me. Now they just seem pathetic. When he finally pulled himself together, he asked if there was any chance we could repair our relationship, if I could ever forgive him. I told him the truth: no, some things can't be fixed. Some bridges stay burned. He wasn't my father anymore, had given up that right when he threw me away. The only relationship we had now was debtor and creditor. He nodded slowly, like had expected that answer but still hoped for something different. Then he asked about his other kids. Did I hate them too? I told him I didn't hate them, they were innocent in all this, but I had no interest in playing happy family with people I didn't know. As he was leaving, he paused at the door and said something I wasn't expecting, that I wasn't the only one Diane had manipulated, that she'd been threatening to leave him for years, using the kids as leverage, that once I was gone she'd found new targets and their kids, everyone, that their marriage was basically over, but he was too broke and beaten down to leave. I didn't respond. Not my problem anymore. 2 days later my dad's lawyer contacted mine, had agreed to the settlement. He would make monthly payments with the house and business assets as collateral. The first payment would come through within 30 days. I thought I'd feel some huge sense of victory or satisfaction when he agreed. Instead, I just felt done, like a chapter finally closing. 3 weeks after our meeting, my half-sister texted me again. She said Diane had moved out, taking her youngest kids with her after finding out about the settlement. Apparently she'd gone ballistic when she realized half their assets would be liquidated to pay me back. She'd called my dad every name in the book, blamed him for ruining their lives, then packed up and left. My sister also said my dad had finally told them the truth about what happened all those years ago, not some sanitized version but the real ugly truth: how had chosen Diane over me, how had stolen my money, how had lied to them about who I was and why I was gone. I didn't respond to her message either. Maybe someday I'll be ready to have some kind of relationship with my half-siblings, but not now, not while everything is still raw. The first payment from my dad came through last week. My lawyer says he sold his truck to make it happen. Good, let him feel what it's like to lose things that matter to him. I've decided to use part of the money to help Aunt Leah buy a house. She's been renting that same small apartment for years, working herself to the bone. She took me in when I had nothing, and I want to make sure she never has to worry about a roof over her head again. The rest of the money is going into investments and a fund I'm setting up for kids who've been abandoned by their parents.